Richard and I had been married for 3 years. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but I wouldn't say it was bad either. Over time, however, I began noticing small, uncomfortable shifts in the way Richard behaved when we were around his family. He wasn't mean and he wasn't abusive, but there were moments, particularly in the presence of his father, Paul, that felt different. Paul was an old school man. He believed that the man should run the house and the women should be quiet and obedient. I'd always known that Richard's family had traditional values, but I never thought they'd affect me in such a direct way. I had been raised in a household where respect was mutual, where marriage was a partnership, and women were not just seen as support roles. They were partners in life. At first, I didn't think it would matter. Richard wasn't like his father. I told myself he was open-minded, kind, and thoughtful. But as time passed, I realized I had been wrong. The little things, the way he acted when his family came over, the way he avoided conflict, the way he sometimes shrugged off Paul's blatant disrespect, started to bother me more and more. One regular Saturday evening, I decided to host a family dinner. It wasn't a special occasion or a holiday, just an opportunity for us all to spend the time together. I spent hours preparing the meal, not because anyone expected it, but because I love to cook. I wanted to impress them, to create a warm, welcoming atmosphere. I spent the entire afternoon making a beautiful spread. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, collard greens, cornbread, the works. I set the table carefully, lighting candles and arranging the plates just so. I felt proud of what I had accomplished. When Richard's family arrived, there were the usual greetings. Paul, ever the critic, commented about how lucky Richard was to have a wife who cooked and cleaned, as though this was the only thing I was good for. I smiled and nodded through it. Used to these remarks by now, I placed the plates on the table, one by one, and set my plate down last, right in front of my seat. But just as I was about to sit, something happened that I didn't expect. I felt a hand reach across me, and before I could react, Paul took my plate from in front of me and passed it down the table to Mark. "You eat after the men," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I froze. I laughed at first, because I thought it had to be some sort of joke. Who says that in 2025? But as I looked around the table, I realized it wasn't a joke. Mark was already digging into the food, like nothing had happened. Carol, Paul's wife, stared down at her plate in silence, as she always did. Anna, the wife of Richard's brother, sat there looking uncomfortable, but kept her head down, not daring to say anything. And then there was Richard, my own husband. Instead of standing up for me, he just looked at me, a look that wasn't one of disbelief, shame, or anger at his father. No, it was a look that said, "Don't make a scene." He leaned in and whispered softly, "It's tradition." Something inside me snapped. I wasn't raised to be anyone's afterthought. I wasn't about to sit there and wait for permission to eat in my own home. But I knew if I made a scene, I'd just be dismissed as overreacting. I would be the one who was difficult, the one who didn't understand family traditions. So instead, I did something worse. I said nothing. I sat still, like a stone, while they all ate. I didn't reach for my plate. I didn't touch the food I had spent hours making. I watched Richard laugh at something Mark said. I watched Paul take second helpings, unbothered by the insult he had just thrown my way. I watched Carol, as silent as ever, do nothing. I let the anger simmer inside me. I knew I wouldn't let this go, but I also knew I had to wait for the right moment to act. That night, after they had all left, I lay awake for hours, thinking something had changed inside me. I knew I couldn't let this kind of behavior continue. I wasn't just angry at Paul. I was angry at Richard too. For years, I had tolerated his family's disrespect, believing that it was just how things were. But in that moment, I realized it wasn't just about a dinner. It was about a lifetime of conditioning. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I had to decide, was I going to continue living my life as a passive participant, or was I going to take a stand? The next morning, I woke up early, my mind racing with a plan. I didn't say anything to Richard, but I sent out invitations for another dinner. It was going to be a dinner they'd never expect. I wanted them to see what it felt like to be on the other side of that tradition. The following Sunday, I went all out. I masebante prime rib, garlic butter shrimp, scalloped potatoes, homemade bread, roasted asparagus. Every dish was a masterpiece. I was determined to create a meal they would remember. But this time, it wasn't just about the food. It was about sending a message. Richard was surprised when I told him I wanted to host another dinner. Are you sure? He asked, looking at me curiously. You were pretty quiet last night. I smiled. I just want to make sure your family knows how much I appreciate them. As I set the table that evening, the house filled with the smell of roasted garlic and butter. The food was steaming. The table was set beautifully, and everything was perfect. When they arrived, I could feel the tension building. The men sat down first, just like last time. They reached for their forks, already digging in. That's when I struck. I stood up, walked over to the men's side of the table, and took their plates, one by one, right out from under them. I handed them to the women. Carol, Anna, and me. You eat after the women, I said, keeping my voice even, as calm as Paul's had been the week before. The room fell silent. Paul's jaw tightened. Mark scoffed, shaking his head like I was being ridiculous. Richard blinked at me. Damas blinked at me. Babe, what are you doing? He asked. I picked up my fork and took a slow, deliberate bite. It's tradition, I said, smiling sweetly. Mark was fuming. This is stupid, he muttered. I tilted my head. It wasn't stupid last week, was it? Anna, sweet Anna, let out the smallest snort of laughter. She quickly covered it with a cough, but I saw it. And for the first time, I saw Anna looking at her husband in a different way. Carol, too, did something she had never done before. She picked up her fork and started eating before Paul. She still looked nervous, but for the first time, she did. But I took my time eating, savoring every bite. The men sat there, uncomfortable, hungry, and completely powerless. And I wasn't even close to done. When I finished my plate, I leaned back, wiped my mouth, and said, since the women cooked, the men can do the dishes. The look on Paul's face was priceless. Mark actually laughed, thinking I was joking. But when I didn't move, when I didn't start clearing the plates like an obedient housewife, he realized I wasn't kidding. Richard hesitated. He looked at me, then at his father, then sighed. He stood up and started collecting the plates. Just like that, the balance of power shifted. After the dinner, the atmosphere in the house was different. It wasn't just the tension at the table, it was the feeling that something had shifted. Something that couldn't easily be undone. That night, as Richard and I sat in the kitchen, I noticed that he wasn't his usual self. The sink was full of dishes, and Richard just sat there, swirling his drink, staring at the table as if it had betrayed him. The silence between us was thick. For the first time in a long time, I felt like he was looking at me differently. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tinged with frustration. What the hell was that? I raised an eyebrow. Dinner. He let out a humorless laugh, his voice dripping with irritation. You humiliated my dad. I tilted my head, my voice soft but firm. Did I? Or did I just show him what it feels like to be on the other side. Richard set his drink down harder than necessary, clearly upset. You made everyone uncomfortable, he said, his frustration mounting. I don't understand why you had to make it a whole thing. And that's when I lost it. I slammed my hand on the counter. Oh! So it was fine when your dad did it to me. But when I do the exact same thing, suddenly it's a problem. Richard's eyes hardened. Somrade shit mammidi. And he quickly retorted. That's just how he is. I cut him off, unable to hold back my anger. No, Richard, that's just how you let him be. That's how your mom lets him be. That's how your brother treats Anna. And I guarantee you, that's exactly how he's raising his sons to be. Too. Richard flinched. The words hit him harder than I expected. He rubbed his temples and exhaled. I don't understand why you have to make everything into a fight. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a more serious tone, but still resolute. No, Richard, I'm finally making it as big as it needs to be. There was silence between us, as the weight of my words settled in. For a moment, I felt like we were standing on opposite sides of an invisible divide, one that I hadn't realized had been building for years. Richard was struggling. He was torn between the family he had been conditioned to protect and the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. I didn't know where this was going, but I knew I couldn't back down. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Anna. I glanced over at Richard, still asleep beside me, and quietly slipped out of bed to take the call. Anna, are you okay? I asked, concerned. Her voice was shaky. I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for standing up to them, for showing me that I'm not crazy for thinking this isn't normal. My heart softened. You're welcome. But how bad is it? Anna took a deep breath before responding. I don't know. Mark never hit me or anything. But he talks to me like I'm a child. He tells me what to wear, what to cook, who I can and can't see. If I ever push back, he tells me I'm emotional, hysterical, and need to calm down. And his dad backs him up every time. I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest. Anna's voice grew quieter. Last night, when you flipped the script, I watched Mark's face. He was furious, not because he thought it was unfair, but because for the first time, he wasn't in control. I let out a breath, letting the anger fade. What do you want to do? There was a long silence. And then, barely above a whisper, Anna said, I don't know. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. You don't have to decide anything right now, but just know that you deserve better. You deserve so much more than this. Anna sniffled, and I could hear the tear in her voice. I knew that something had shifted in her, too. Something powerful. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that house with her head down, silently enduring everything Mark and Paul had thrown her way. I didn't expect a call from Paul, but 2 days later, as I was at work, my phone rang. It was him. Paul. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Hello. There was a silence on the other end, followed by a slow inhale. You think you're clever, don't you? His voice was thick with disdain. I took a deep breath, staying calm. Paul, if this is about the dinner, this is about my son. He interrupted. I frowned. Excuse me. He spat back. You embarrassed him in front of his family. You put ideas in his wife's head. You've been poisoning him against us since the day you married him. I didn't flinch. Poisoning him by expecting to be treated like a person. Don't play dumb, Paul. This is about equality. He chuckled darkly. Women like you don't want equality. You want control. You want to turn my boy into some weak, spineless excuse for a man. I raised him better than that. I took a slow breath. Well, Paul, if you're so convinced your son is weak, maybe you should ask yourself who raised him that way. There was silence on the other end, followed by a low chuckle. You think you've won something here? He asked. Let me tell you something, sweetheart. A woman who fights Her husband's family doesn't stay married for long. He hung up before I could respond, and I sat there staring at my phone. My heart wasn't pounding because I was scared. It was pounding with fury. Paul had underestimated me. He thought I was just some rebellious little girl who needed to be put in her place. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Anna, for Carol, for every woman in that family who had ever been forced to wait their turn. I knew Paul had no idea what was coming next. Richard's reaction over the next week told me everything I needed to know. He was quiet, walking on eggshells around me. He didn't want another fight. He didn't want to talk about the dinner, his father, or anything that had happened. But the truth was, he couldn't avoid it forever. Little things started to happen. He would leave the room when I was on the phone with Anna. He started defending his dad more, saying things like, he just comes from a different time. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, he muttered, "You can't change people like him overnight." I stared at him. "And you think he should stay that way?" Richard sighed deeply. "I think you could have handled it differently." I scoffed. "Like how?" "By smiling and nodding while he treats me like an unpaid maid." Richard snapped. "You don't get it." I didn't back down. "No, Richard, you don't get it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's normal to be treated like a second-class citizen." He groaned, rubbing his temples. "Good. You always do this. You always have to turn everything into a fight." I laughed bitterly. "Actually, I didn't turn things into a fight. I'm just standing up for myself for the first time in years." I turned off the bedside lamp and laid down, my back to him. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I wondered if I had misjudged the man lying next to me. 2 days later, Anna called again. This time, she wasn't crying. She was furious. "I can't do it anymore." Anna whispered into the phone. "I can't keep living like this." I sat up straight, my heart pounding. "Anna, what happened?" Her voice trembled as she exhaled. "He found the pamphlets." "What pamphlets?" I asked, confusion flooding through me. Anna let out a shaky breath. "I went to see a lawyer, just to ask questions, just to see what my options were. But Mark must have gone through my purse. He found them last night." My stomach dropped. "What did he do?" Anna's voice was barely above a whisper. "He freaked out, started yelling at me about how I was humiliating him, how I was trying to ruin the family. He grabbed my phone, told me I wasn't leaving him ever." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Did he hurt you?" There was a long pause, and then the softest reply, "Not yet." I didn't hesitate. "Anna, listen to me. You need to leave." "I know," she whispered, but the doubt in her voice was palpable. "But I don't know where to go." I didn't even think. "You come here, pack a bag, take your car, and get out before he comes home." There was a moment of hesitation, but then she agreed. "Okay." I hung up the phone, and immediately started getting everything ready. I pulled out blankets, set up the guest room, and made sure everything was prepared for her. But right as I was about to call her back, Richard walked in. He dropped his keys on the counter. "Hey," he said casually. "Who was that?" I hesitated. I had never lied to Richard before, but this felt different. I had to protect Anna. "Just Anna," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Richard narrowed his eyes. "What's going on with her?" I shrugged, my heart racing. "Just girl talk." He stared at me for a long moment before nodding, but the suspicion was clear in his eyes. As he left the room, I felt the first real stirrings of doubt in my chest. Something had shifted, but I didn't know what that meant for us. 3 hours later, Anna arrived. Her hands were shaking as she pulled her suitcase through the door. Her eyes were red from crying. I pulled her into a hug. "You're safe now," I whispered into her hair. Anna nodded, but didn't say much. She didn't eat much that night, picking at her food and staring at nothing. The weight of everything she had gone through seemed to hang in the air, suffocating her. Just as we were about to go to bed, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and froze. It was Mark. I snatched the phone out of her hand and silenced it before she could answer. A moment later, Richard's phone rang from the bedroom. We both froze. I looked out the window and my heart sank. There, in the driveway, were Mark and Paul. They were standing in front of the house, silhouettes framed by the porch light. Anna turned pale, her body shaking. No, 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 she muttered, gripping the fabric of her shirt like it was the only thing holding her together. I took a deep breath, turning to her. You don't have to do this. You don't owe them anything. She swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. If I don't go out there, he'll just keep coming. I was about to say something, but just then, Richard stepped into the room. He was still holding his ringing phone. He looked at Anna, then at me, his face twisted with realization. You knew, he said, his voice low. I didn't answer. He coughed, shaking his head. Jesus Christ, you went behind my back. You didn't even tell me. I clenched my jaw. I knew you'd try to stop me. Richard's nostrils flared. Mark is my brother. You don't think I should have had a say in this? I looked him in the eye. Your brother is scaring his wife so badly that she had to run in the middle of the night. Do you really think I care about how that makes you feel? Richard didn't respond. He couldn't. We both knew the answer. There was another knock at the door. Harder this time. I could hear Mark's voice. Come outside, babe. Let's talk. Anna shrank back, shaking her head. Paul's voice followed. You're embarrassing yourself. Girl, you don't just walk out of a marriage. I felt a fresh wave of rage rise up inside me. I turned to Richard. Are you going to let them do this right here, in our house? Richard looked torn, but then, without a word, he went to the door. I stiffened. Richard, don't... But he opened the door anyway. Mark and Paul stepped in like they owned the place. Anna flinched when Mark walked toward her. You're being crazy, Mark said in a soft voice, trying to control the situation. Come home. Let's talk like adults. But I saw it. His fingers twitched at his sides, and his eyes kept darting to Paul for approval. He wasn't there to talk. He was there to win. Anna shook her head. No. Her voice wavered, but she didn't back down. I'm not coming back with you. Mark exhaled through his nose, trying to stay calm. This is ridiculous, he muttered. Then Paul took over. He turned his glare on me. You did this. I crossed my arms. Damn right I did. Paul's eyes darkened. You're ruining this family. I laughed coldly. No, Paul, I'm just exposing what's already broken. He stepped closer, trying to intimidate me, but I didn't move. You have no idea what you've started, he said in a low voice. And that's when I snapped. I looked him dead in the eye. I started nothing. You did! The day you taught your sons that their wives were beneath them. The day you told your daughter-in-law she had no right to leave. The day you raised your son to think control was the same as love. Paul's jaw clenched. His fists balled up. And then Anna spoke, her voice trembling but strong. I'm filing for divorce. The words hung in the air, and Mark's face went pale. You don't mean that. But Anna didn't back down. I do. Paul stepped forward, his voice dangerously low. No woman in this family gets divorced. Anna lifted her chin. Then I guess I'm not part of this family anymore. And just like that, the power shifted. The silence that followed was deafening. Paul's face froze. The shock of Anna's declaration hitting him harder than anything he had anticipated. The grip he had always held over his family His legacy of control was slipping right through his fingers. Mark looked like he had been punched in the stomach, unable to comprehend what had just unfolded. Richard stood there, frozen. For the first time, I could see the internal conflict in his eyes. He was witnessing everything he had been raised to accept: the traditions, the control, the roles. But now it was right in front of him, and it was no longer abstract. His father's empire of manipulation and power had crumbled, and Richard was caught in the middle. Paul, enraged and desperate, turned to Richard. "Get in the car," he snapped, his voice thick with fury. Richard blinked, not understanding. "What?" he asked, barely believing what he was hearing. Paul's face was red with anger. "Get in the car. We are leaving. This ends now." His voice was sharp, commanding, as if he were still in charge. I watched Richard, his hesitation palpable. I saw the battle in his eyes, his loyalty to his father, the years of conditioning to uphold the family's ideals, and the realization that he was finally facing the truth. For a moment, I thought he might follow his father, that he might give in to the pressure. But then something changed. Richard took a slow, deliberate breath. He squared his shoulders and looked his father in the eye. "I'm staying with my wife," he said firmly. Paul's expression faltered, and in that instant, I knew that a line had been crossed. Richard had made a choice. He had chosen me, his partner. He had chosen us over the decades of tradition and control that had held him captive. Paul's face went from red to pale, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Mark, too, was too stunned to say anything. For the first time, the power had shifted. The weight that Paul had carried for so long was no longer his to wield. Mark shot one last angry look at Anna, his eyes filled with betrayal, before he turned and followed his father out of the house. The door slammed behind them, with a finality that echoed through the house. It was quiet now. For the first time, it was just Anna, Richard, and me. I turned to Anna, her tear-streaked face now holding a glimmer of something different. Hope. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. She was free. Later that evening, after the house had settled into an uneasy silence, Richard and I sat together in the kitchen. His hand shook slightly as he poured himself a drink, his eyes still heavy with the weight of what had just happened. He stared at the table, his mind clearly still processing everything. "Are you sure okay?" I asked softly, my voice gentle. Richard let out a deep breath, rubbing his face. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "I feel like I've lost something. A father, a brother. But maybe I've gained something too." I nodded, my heart heavy for him, but also proud of the strength he had shown. "You've gained us, Richard. You've gained the chance to build something better, something equal." There was a long pause as he absorbed my words, and I could see him beginning to understand. He wasn't just fighting for me anymore. He was fighting for us, for our future, for the kind of partnership we deserved. Days went by, and the repercussions of that night continued to unfold. Anna moved into her own place. She got a job. She started therapy. And slowly but surely, she began to rebuild her life. For the first time in years, I saw her smile without fear. And then there was Carol. One night, out of the blue, I received a message from her. She had left Paul. She packed her bags and disappeared. And when she reached out, she was living in a small apartment 3 towns over. She was starting over. As for Richard, it wasn't easy. There were nights when he almost picked up the phone to call his father, when the weight of undoing years of conditioning nearly crushed him. But he didn't. He stayed with me. He stayed with us. A few months later, Richard and I were sitting together, just the two of us. He leaned over and whispered, "I see it now." I didn't ask him what he meant, because I already knew in that moment. I realized that this wasn't just my victory. It wasn't just about me standing up for myself at that dinner. It was our victory, mine, Richard's, Anna's, and Carol's. It was a victory for every woman who had been made to feel small, every woman who had been taught that her voice didn't matter, that her needs didn't count. We were finally free.